Thank you very much, Candice. Good morning to you. Good morning to my colleague, the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Faris Al-Rawi. Good morning to Dr. Jeanine St. Bernard, who is here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, happy Independence Day to you. Happy Independence Day 58th. We are now 58 years old to Trinidad and Tobago. Before I get into the clinical details, I want to give the population some idea of where we are in this global pandemic as a country, as a region, and as a world population. For those who are paying attention to the international news, many countries that did well in their first phase are now unfortunately recording record numbers of new infections in the second wave. It is no secret, this is in the international media. Countries like Germany, India, Argentina are recording high numbers of new infections. France, an article in Saturday's Express, COVID deaths rise in CARICOM nations. I won't call it the countries, this is nothing to celebrate, but this is what is happening globally and regionally. There are now 25,447,270 cases around the world, 25 million, with 851,512 deaths. The 7-day moving average of new cases per day has not gone down over the past month or so. It has stayed steady at around 250,000 new cases per day. And the 7-day moving average for deaths remains steady at 5,000 cases per day. And when you look at the two graphs, as I have shown from time to time, the peak in deaths lags the peak in cases. What are we in Trinidad and Tobago doing? On Wednesday, we would have implemented our escalation strategy now that we have community spread. At the clinical level, we took certain decisions which we always envisaged that we will take on new discharge criteria. We took a decision for stay-at-home quarantine, and Dr. St. Bernard will go into details on that. We took a decision to start to provide those who are self-quarantining at home with the tools to manage themselves, especially now with pulse oximeters. Dr. St. Bernard will go into some detail of what are the benefits of that. We have so far given out 100, and in the coming week or weeks, we'll be giving out another 1,000 free of charge to these households. And Dr. St. Bernard will go into the technical details about that. We now have increased hospital capacity to deal with the moderately or severely ill. So those are some clinical adjustments as we implemented our escalation strategy. Our testing strategy, we are going to be continuing full speed ahead with our decentralization strategy of testing as technology and supply chain allows us. We had already started this over a month ago, deploying our Gene Expert machines in Tobago, Sangre Grande, and Port of Spain. As I said before, these are low volume but high turnover. This is what the technology is at the time and the volumes now. There has been a major development with our testing strategy, which I now want to bring to the attention of the public, which will help us to totally decentralize our testing strategy. It's a major development that we have been working with PAHO over the past 2 weeks. And I now have PAHO's sign off this morning via Dr. Erica Wheeler to tell the public what we have formally signed on to with PAHO. You may recall about 2 to 3 months ago, we were being asked about antigen testing. And we did say at that time, the antigen testing that was available was not very accurate. It had between a 25 to 50% false negative failure rate. And we felt those figures were not good enough. I am happy to report that PAHO approached the Ministry of Health and the Minister of Health about 2 weeks ago to sign on to new technology which gives us the capacity now to do antigen testing with test kits which are above or around 95% accuracy. This is going to be a game changer. We have ordered and we signed off on it on Friday. I had a deadline of August 31st, which is today. We did our needs analysis, we sourced the funding, and we signed off on it on Friday. And I am now able to tell you we have sourced 160,000 rapid test antigen kits, 160,000 at a cost of $6 US per test. So that is going to be an investment of around $960,000 US dollars. This test kit is in the form of like a cassette, similar to what a pregnancy test looks like now. It will be deployed once it reaches Trinidad and Tobago at the primary level and the emergency departments. This is going to be a total game changer as we continue and deepen our policy of decentralization of testing. I will now read to you the missive that I have from PAHO to tell you what this test will do. Mr. Minister, I reviewed the information on the test and it is an antigen test. What it does, the test identifies people who are currently infected with the coronavirus. It may be used as a quick test to detect active infections. Initially, it will not be used to diagnose disease, but may be used to screen people to identify those who need a more definitive test. So it's a screen. How it works. Antigen tests can identify virus in the nose and throat secretions. It does this by looking for proteins from the virus as opposed to the diagnostic test which looks for genetic material. This is the same technology used in your doctor's office for rapid strep testing. So we have placed our order for 160,000 tests. I spoke with Dr. Erica Wheeler this morning. Our order through PAHO now goes into the production line because we have made a firm commitment and we will be working assiduously with PAHO to get these tests into Trinidad and Tobago in the shortest possible time as we deepen our decentralization policy. So that's a major development, major investment. The third thing that we have had to do in recent days, unfortunately now, after the clinical interventions, the testing strategy based on decentralization, are the legislative measures. As you know, we tried moral suasion for a particular period of time, and I must say it did work with certain sectors of the population. But again, it did not work with other sectors. So we have had to go the route of legislative measures, and the Honorable Attorney General is here today to explain in detail what those legislative measures will look like. So this is what the government, the Ministry of Health, has been doing over the past 2 to 3 weeks as we continue to learn how to live with this virus. We have to learn to live with this virus and have to learn to adapt and adopt new lifestyle measures so we can continue to have a country which is fairly open with a fair degree of economic activity. So ladies and gentlemen, these are the developments this morning. I just want to go through the clinical update for you this morning. Number of samples submitted to CARFA, UWI and other local sites for testing, 23,530. Number of unique patient tests completed, 20,608. Number of repeated tests, 2,922. Number of samples which have tested positive at public and private facilities, 1,727. Total number of active cases, 1,029. Total number of deaths, 22. And again, our deepest condolences go out to those 22 families. Number of persons discharged, 676. The number of COVID-19 positive patients in hospital, 78. At CUVA, we have 61, 6 in ICU, 9 in HDU, and at CORA, we have 17. So I think that gives you 78. At our step-down transition facilities, we have 6 patients. At Brooklyn, Sangre Grande, we have none. Balandra, we have none. Tacarigua, we have 2. UWE DB Penal Campus, we have 2. UWE Canada Hall, 0. UWE Freedom Hall, 0. And Napa, we have 2. So that's the clinical update, and that's the policy interventions that your government has been taking on your behalf. Ms. Alcantara, I want to thank you very much for the past few minutes.
Thank you very much, Minister Dayal Singh, for that very important update. And now we will have a statement from the Honorable Faris Alwari, Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs.
Good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen of Trinidad and Tobago. Notice I've just taken off my mask when the Minister of Health has just put on his own. And I've done that so that I can explain the regulations as we've put them forward this morning. So, first of all, happy Independence Day to Trinidad and Tobago. It is a great privilege to be with our beautiful citizens this morning in the best way possible, trying to organize our health and our wellness and to make sure that we comply with the law. I'd like to say that last night at roughly this morning at 2:30 this morning, the government printer sent me the published regulations as regulation number 306 of 2020. I'd like to immediately indicate that this is to be replaced by a fresh document because the printer inadvertently produced a document with certain errors in it, and that an errata has been settled this morning as it relates to 2 matters which I will guide us through in a short while. The regulations before us now stand as regulation number 26. And we had a lot of discussion in trying to get to a fair balance for regulations. The discussions involved the Chief Medical Officer, it involved the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Health, and the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs. We're pleased to say that the legislation which allows us to produce mask wearing rules was principally set up in the amendments that we made to the Public Health Ordinance. As the country will be aware, we settled amendments in the House on Friday and in the Senate on Saturday. In the course of settling those amendments, we have now created a new fixed penalty system for the enforcement of the public health regulations. This fixed penalty system is a carve-out of the general law. The general law allows us to arrest people via the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, take you through the legal system by presenting you to the police station, securing station bail if permissible, if not, taking you to a magistrate where bail is then presented by way of application, and then you're processed. We view that that is really something which ought to be left for the more serious offences. In the amendments which we passed in the Senate and in the House, we, in a new Act of Parliament, number 23 of 2020, we introduced this fixed penalty notice system. And what this allows is the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to approach the population for a range of matters, and we have started with, and we're confined with, mask wearing. We have allowed for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to come up to every single person who is in a public place, every single person who is in a vehicle on a public road, to have enforcement for mask wearing. Now, let's go through those 2 examples so that people can have a fair understanding of what to expect and what the liability will be like for failure to wear this mask. We know that the ultimate liability is the risk of infection, And that risk of infection is very severe, and we're dealing with a global pandemic. That's the ultimate risk. There is another risk, and that risk is at present that you can be visited with a fixed penalty notice and liable to a fine of $1,000. That fine can be adjusted easily by way of future regulations, but we've started at $1,000. So let's go through the two examples that you may be exposed to. The first one let's deal with is the situation of wearing a mask in a vehicle. Now, a motor vehicle at law is defined to include everything. It includes from a bus right down to a car, right down to a tractor. Any motor vehicle is certainly permitted. Once you're on the public road, you are entitled to your driving as a conditionality, but you are obliged to obey the law. The law as it's set out in the regulations, and you'll find these regulations at Regulation 6 of those that are published, and there will be an erratum which is published because the printer inadvertently printed an earlier version from that night and not in fact the final version. At Regulation 6, you will find set out very clearly that no person shall, without reasonable excuse, travel in a vehicle or vessel. Now we're treating with vessels, meaning anything that is on the sea. So we're treating with both vehicles and with vessels, and that you're obliged to have a face mask, a face shield, or a face covering. Effectively, what you have to have on your face, as defined, is something which covers your nose, your mouth, and your chin. You notice in Trinidad and Tobago we have a very peculiar way of wearing masks. Most people now wear masks simply as a chin guard, and you have the nose and the mouth fully exposed. That is not the definition of a mask at law. The mask at law must be something which covers your nose, your mouth, and your chin. So you're obliged in a public place, in a vehicle, or on a vessel, that is on anything on the water, to wear your mask. We've allowed for mask, a covering, and a face shield, so that we're allowing for the face shield itself. And we're saying that you must wear that unless you have a reasonable excuse. We've gone on to explain what a reasonable excuse is so that people have a fair understanding. But very importantly, we have disapplied the law. Let me explain that. We've said in the law that the law does not apply to children of a particular age, nor does it apply to you when you're in the situation of being in a vehicle or a vessel by yourself. So we have to understand that we have limitations. You must have this covering your nose, your mouth, and your chin. It can be a mask, a covering, or a shield. It does not apply in the situation of a child. Now, this is what needs to be corrected by the errata. In the regulations, you see two ages at presently in public circulation. One is age 11 for children and age 5. It's in fact supposed to be age 8. And age 8 has been the number selected because in the law, currently in Trinidad and Tobago, you cannot prosecute a child for any offense if that child is under 8 years of age. That's what we call the Dolly Incapax rule in law. You are not capable of having a criminal intent if you're under 8 years of age. Now, there was a lot of discussion about being in a vehicle or a vessel on your own. And what about the common sense situation of being in your car with just the members of your family? Members of the public have quite correctly said, listen, this makes very little sense that we're at home, all of us together. It's a husband, wife, and children or relatives who live together who get into a vehicle. Why should we have to wear a face covering on ourselves in a vehicle where it's just us? And please permit me, Trinidad and Tobago, accept that this is because we are Trinidad and Tobago. We have in Trinidad and Tobago a system called the PH system. That is a large part of our structured society. It is something that has existed alongside an official transportation system. And recognizing Trinidad as we must, it would be extremely difficult for law enforcement to know which private vehicle, any P registration vehicle, was one which was for hire or one which was not for hire. And because we have a thriving and large PH industry, we're therefore compelled to recognize that it would be near impossible for law enforcement to stop every private car to figure out whether you are related to the person or living in the same household. So please understand that this is a feature of Trinidad and Tobago's recognized society, and that therefore the only exception for being in a vehicle or a vessel is if you are by yourself. So, two exceptions. One, you're a child. It's going to be that you're under 8 years of age. Secondly, that you're by yourself. Now let's go into the position of what the reasonable excuses look like. We've set out into the law that you may have a reasonable excuse, and we've set out the examples of reasonable excuse. That you can't wear your face mask, shield, or covering because of a physical or mental impairment or disability, because it may cause you severe distress. We had situations where claustrophobia can't be explained as either a mental difficulty or a physical disability, and therefore we had to include the circumstances of severe distress. We've had to put in, of course, the situation where somebody may be traveling with somebody who's reliant on sign language, is reliant upon lip reading. We've dealt with where you have to remove your face mask or face shield because you were just avoiding some imminent injury or risk of harm, that you were traveling to avoid injury, to escape harm, and that you didn't have the face mask or face shield with you. If it's reasonably necessary for you to eat or drink and you remove your mask or face shield for that purpose, so that means obviously temporarily. Where a person has had to remove a face mask or face shield for taking medication, again temporarily. Or where a request is made of you for identification or security purposes. Now, even though those are the express reasons, we have the factor that face mask wearing, face shield wearing, face covering wearing, and again this applies not only in the vehicle or vessel context, but also in a public place, that it's up to the law enforcement officers to stop you. They would have reasonable suspicion because you're not wearing your mask, ask you questions, and then decide whether the law is going to be applied to you or not. Now, the very simple remedy to all of this is simply just wear your mask. Now, ladies and gentlemen, parents, we have a responsibility towards our children. It is difficult to legislate common sense. Obviously, this virus is no respecter of age. We've seen that babies at 10 months and younger have been diagnosed in Trinidad and Tobago as asymptomatic carriers of the COVID-19 virus. It's quite simple. If your child can tolerate mask wearing, encourage the mask wearing. We can't prosecute a child under the age of 8, and God forbid the government and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service certainly does not want to prosecute a child. But we have to encourage mask wearing. Now, the law has a second feature. In the Regulation 6 and in Regulation 7, you'll see that we put the law into a common sense approach. We put a liability upon the person with responsibility for a child to ensure that a child, whether the child is in public or whether the child is in a vehicle or a vessel, that that child wears a face mask, and that the person with responsibility who has that child with him or her, that person will be held liable for the breach of the law. So you may find yourself exposed to a fixed penalty offense, $1,000, if you yourself are not wearing your face mask in a vehicle or vessel and there's more than one person in it. If you're the sole occupant of the vehicle or vessel, well, you're okay. If there are more than one people in the vehicle or vessel, you have to wear the masks. Even if you're related and most regrettably so because of the pH phenomenon in Trinidad and Tobago. Secondly, you may find yourself as a person with responsibility for a child exposed to an offense. And that offense is that you fail to have your child with a mask on. Thirdly, you may find yourself in a public place exposed to not wearing your mask, or as a person with responsibility for a child, not having the child wear a mask. The simple antidote to these fixed penalty notices is that you wear your mask. Now, in the regulations, you'll see in Regulation 8 that we have the situation of defining what you can do in terms of public transportation. The Honorable Prime Minister told the nation that if you're dealing with a motor car, and again a motor car, the definition of motor car is in the regulations as signed. That which is in circulation has not been the one with the definition on it. That will be published in a matter of a couple of minutes. But if you're in a motor vehicle, which is simply a 5-person car, a sedan, a car carrying 5 people, that you're allowed 75%. What does that mean? You're allowed 4 people. So instead of 5, you're allowed 4 people. In any other type of motor vehicle, whether it is a red band maxi, a 25-seater, a 12-seater, a PTSC bus, you're going to have no more than 65% of the persons that you're licensed to carry in that vehicle. So that's it in respect of quantum and how you look at it. We have allowed for education, businesses, etc., for all of these things to operate. Specifically, there may be situations where you have to ask for a license or permission to have an examination, because there are multiple examinations that are being held, whether it's at tertiary education level, secondary education level, etc. All of that is permitted by way of recourse to the Minister of Health. And the regulations, of course, have the feature of medical practitioners, labs being obliged at law to tell the Minister of Health, to tell the Chief Medical Officer when they encounter a COVID positive situation. Very importantly, we have introduced the concept in these regulations of a self-quarantine. That is so that persons who present with a COVID positive situation and whom the CMO and the medical expertise team view to be capable of being quarantined at home, that those people can be self-isolated at their own places of abode, at their own homes, by permission in law, and this is set out here. I want to remind that this law now has, in summary, 1, the introduction of a fixed penalty notice system. 2, that the fixed penalty applies to mask wearing in a vehicle, a vessel, which is something on the sea, or in a public space. There is an exception for reasonable cause or excuse. That exception is for medical or physical reasons, certain urgent situations such as escaping danger, momentarily moving for the purposes of eating or consuming drink, for taking medication. You also have the situation where parents and people with responsibility, so a grandfather with a grandchild, a guardian has a child with you, you can be exposed for your child not wearing a mask, whether in a vehicle or vessel or in a public space. You also have the introduction of public spaces. In the public space, effectively, the guidelines will guide you as to what you are to do in wearing masks. So where there is a physical distance that is permitted, if you are in an office with shields up, etc., there may be certain exceptions depending upon how the CMO says that. However, persons are encouraged to wear your masks in public offices, etc. The more we engage in mask wearing at this point, according to current advice coming from WHO and the CMO, is the faster we're going to be able to regain our economy and structures. I'm confident that you're going to have some questions. I'd just like to end by saying that the erratum will be fixed by way of an immediate publication which will go into effect. All that you will see happen is a definition of a motor car, meaning a 5-seater car, and you will very importantly see that the age limit is 8 years of age with respect to mask wearing for children. in a vehicle or vessel, and also in a public place. Honourable Minister, I am sure that there will be many questions at question time, and I will answer them there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And now Dr. St. Bernard will provide guidelines on how to safely self-isolate at home. Dr. St. Bernard?
Hello and good morning. Good morning, ministers. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the viewing and listening public, and a happy Independence Day to all. What does it mean to self-isolate? I've got to go straight in. According to the World Health Organization, self-isolation is an important measure taken by those who are COVID-19 positive. They have symptoms, and we want them to avoid infecting others in the community, including your family members. Self-isolation is when a person who is experiencing fever, cough, or any of the other COVID-19 symptoms stays at home and does not go to work, school, or public places. What does it mean to self-quarantine? According to the World Health Organization, to self-quarantine means to separate yourself from others because you have been exposed to someone with COVID-19 even though you yourself do not have symptoms. During self-quarantine, you monitor yourself for symptoms. The goal of the self-quarantine is to prevent transmission, since people who become ill with COVID-19 can infect people immediately and up to 2 days prior to developing symptoms, and so self-quarantine can prevent some infections from occurring. So what's the difference between self-isolation, self-quarantine, and even distancing that we have been advised to do? Quarantine means restricting activities or separating people who are not ill themselves but may have been exposed to COVID-19. The goal is to prevent spread of the disease at the time when people just develop symptoms. Isolation, on the other hand, means separating people who are ill. So you have been diagnosed with COVID-19, you have a test and you were positive, and we want to separate you from people who do not have it. And you may be infectious, and we want to prevent the spread of the disease. Physical distancing means being physically apart. The Ministry of Health recommends keeping at least 2 meters or 6 feet apart from others. This is a general measure that everyone should take, even if they are well with no known exposure to COVID-19. So we're looking at those who have been tested positive, we're looking at those who've been exposed, and then we're looking at the general population. So that's where those 3 things fit in. In terms of the slides that you're about to see, I'm just going to quickly go through self-quarantine isolation tips. With regard to cleaning and sanitization, wash clothes, sheets, and towels as often as possible. Clean and sanitize surfaces that are touched often. These include light switches, doorknobs, handrails, chair backs, tabletops, handles, and of course, remotes. With regard to preventing person-to-person spread, we need to not have any sharing of towels, cutlery, glasses. So you are a relative in a home and someone in the home is COVID positive, we are not to share. All persons in the household should wear masks as much as possible and stay away from the at-risk family member as much as possible. Follow all the personal preventative measures even while at home. What about household arrangements? As much as possible again, sleep in separate beds and sanitize often. Use different bathrooms if possible. If you have more than one bathroom in your home, please, with a COVID positive person in the home, you want to be using different bathrooms and sanitizing often if possible. And of course, open your windows to improve ventilation. So this is not a time to have those AC units running. Of concern to us in the Ministry of Health and as health professionals, reports have come to us that persons who are COVID positive and being managed at home, which is something we started recently, have not been wearing their masks. This is a no-no. Even though you are already COVID positive, You do not want your family members at home with you to become infected with COVID, and they may not fare as well as you if they have comorbidities. You all have heard us use this term, hypertension, diabetes, asthma. If you have any relatives in your home with these conditions, you don't want them not faring as well as you if they're exposed to you because you are not wearing your mask. And as well, each time another person in the household becomes infected, the count for quarantine begins again. So let me speak now about the admission criteria to the COVID hospitals, and these criteria will be clinical as well as other criteria. The clinical criteria we use depends on if you have a comorbid disease, meaning you have some other illness, or if you do not. So I'll start with those who have comorbid diseases, with no comorbid diseases. So if you don't have any high blood pressure or any other condition and you are COVID positive, these are the things that we are looking at. And if you have any three of the following symptoms, this will trigger hospital admission. Increasing shortness of breath, increasing fatigue, confusion, chills, persistent fever. Any three of these will trigger hospital admission. What about if you have comorbid diseases? So depending on the comorbid diseases, we may choose one or two in addition to some of the worsening symptoms. So if you have one of being immune compromised, for example on steroids, or you may be taking chemotherapy, or you may have end-stage renal failure, or you may have chronic pulmonary disease. Only one of these is required in addition to two of the following worsening symptoms. And these worsening symptoms are increasing shortness of breath, any central nervous system manifestation, and by that we mean headaches, dizziness, being in and out of consciousness, uncoordinated movements, or drowsiness. So that's number two, CNS, or central nervous system. Increasing fatigue, chills, persistent fever, chest pain, or discomfort. So any one of the ones I said before and any two of these worsening symptoms will trigger COVID hospital admission. What about other comorbid diseases? If you have any of the following two conditions, chronic congestive failure or any other cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, or hypertension, two of these and any three of the same worsening symptoms I said before, shortness of breath, the CNS symptoms, increasing fatigue, chills, persistent fever, chest pain, or discomfort, that will trigger hospital admission as well. And let me just make a plug for truthfulness. As one of the persons that sometimes calls patients at home to tell them they are positive or to monitor daily and what is reported to me by my physicians, we need to be truthful. We want you to be well. We do not want persons having to succumb. So please indicate, I am begging you, please indicate honestly how you are feeling when the physician calls you. You are being called twice daily to be monitored via telephone. It is critical that you tell us what your symptoms are. And if you downplay your symptoms, this can lead to a dangerous situation whereby you can decompensate at home and it can possibly even lead to fatal consequences. So I will quickly now show something that we are now going to be distributing to the population, and this is called a fingertip pulse oximeter, right? And I'm going to tell you what this is. So pulse oximeters or pulse oximeters are medical devices that monitor the level of oxygen in a patient's blood, and it can be used to alert us, the healthcare professionals, if oxygen levels fall below safe levels. And what is that level? 94%. It allows rapid intervention, which for us means admission to a COVID hospital. I will just quickly do a demonstration. So I will just do the sanitizing. So patients, you're going to be getting these at home. We're going to be doing distribution during this week. And this is your pulse oximeter. It's like a paper clip. So you put your index finger in, right? There's a plain blue side on the side with the screen. There's a little blue knob. So you press the blue button and you see light starting to come on. When you are reading this pulse oximeter, you are doing it like this. Bring all your fingers down, put it to face you, because it's important you read it the correct way up. And it is going to then tell us what your heart rate and your oxygen levels are in your blood. Pulse oximeters don't just measure the oxygen level, they also measure your heart rate. And if your heart rate goes above safe levels, and we have chosen 110 beats per minute based on evidence, this will allow us to do a rapid intervention, which could include assessment by an emergency provider. So sometimes we call the ambulance to go and do an assessment for you at home before we make the decision for possible admission, and then that can lead to the admission to hospital. By itself, this pulse oximeter reading can trigger admission. So you may not have any of the other criteria, but if when we call you twice daily, you tell us you have that oxygen level of 94% or less, or a heart rate reading of 110 beats per minute or more, that in itself will trigger admission to hospital. And of course, there are non-clinical criteria, which would include high-risk persons within your household, meaning you are well, COVID positive, but there are persons in your house who have comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cancer, or you are part of a large household where strict isolation guidelines may be compromised. So for example, 9 persons, 1 bedroom, it may not be safe to isolate. You would not be able to isolate adequately. So those are also criteria for admission. The discharge criteria are important and critical. Persons who are in home quarantine, i.e. persons who are not COVID positive but were exposed, we count 14 days from your date of exposure to a suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19. And for persons who are in home isolation, i.e. these are the positive patients, if you are symptomatic, we use a minimum of 10 days after onset of symptoms, plus 3 days asymptomatic, plus an additional 7. So when you add that up, you get 20 days. And if you are asymptomatic, 10 days from the date the positive swab was taken, plus an additional 7 days, which would be 17 days. So that's your discharge criteria for those who are in home isolation. I thank you for your time, Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard. And we move straight into the question and answer segment. Please, members of the media, indicate your name and the media house that you represent. Please, no more than 2 brief questions. We start with CNC 3.
Hi, good morning. Charlene Rampasad here from Guardian Media. Either the health minister or Dr. St. Bernard, can you all say, given the increase in the death toll over the past few days, what are the causational factors that lead to death in people with comorbidities? Is it that these patients are taking too long to seek treatment, or are they not taking their pre-existing conditions seriously? And Minister Diasing, I know on Saturday you would have indicated that state quarantine can be given to those who don't have room at home to quarantine. Has anybody accessed that since then?
Okay, so I'll take the second question first, and then Dr. St. Bernard will deal with that. Yes, so we did offer persons who live in challenge situations to voluntarily come in for state quarantine. Has anybody taken advantage of it as yet? At this point in time, I don't know, but I could find out, but it is an offer. I just want to answer one question posed by Anna Ramdas because she's having trouble logging on. She was asking if dexamethasone is being used in our ICU patients. The answer is yes. You may recall when the evidence of dexamethasone first came out, Dr. Anthony Parkinson was here and indicated prior to that evidence, we were in fact using another related corticosteroid called prednisolone, a cousin to dexamethasone. Since that evidence has come out, I just spoke to Dr. Parkinson, and he has confirmed, Anna and all, that we are in fact using dexamethasone as part of the treatment protocol now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Now to Dr. St. Bernard to respond to the first question.
Hi. So with regard to persons deteriorating at home and possibly dying, I think that when I spoke to truthfulness and people stating the extent to which their symptoms are in fact worsening, I think that is a critical aspect of the home management of patients now with COVID-19. Hence the reason I made the plea, please let us know. We have had cases where we've asked people, how are you doing? We were told they were doing quite fine, and by the time relatives are calling, you know, it's a different story. So we do encourage persons to really state how they are feeling, how they are going, so we can avoid any future deaths at home.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard. And now 98.1, please.
Good morning to the panel. Stephen Cummings, 98.1 FM. And my two questions, one for Minister Dayal Singh and the other for the Attorney General. I start with the Attorney General. AG, reference to Section 6(4) of the regulations, does it mean that deaf persons, for example, and sign language interpreters don't need to wear masks and face coverings? Can you give a some further clarity as it pertains to this particular provision? And Minister Dayal Singh, as we monitor further changes in the mutation of the virus, I know we had some discussion about the business of mutation earlier on, but I saw where Korea has also reported having discovered a new, weaker strain of the virus. Now, locally in Trinidad and Tobago, have we been able to recognize any such recent changes in the mutation as we went about our community surveillance and testing? Thank you.
Oh. You want to go first?
Sure.
No, go ahead.
Good morning again. Thank you so much for the question. If I may, the law is a living, breathing, real thing which you can be exposed to, and there's a consequence of exposure. You may find yourself in a fine. So yes, to answer your question straight, persons who are engaged in sign language are different from lip reading, right? Now there's a combination, as far as I understand it, that sometimes people look to both lips and to hands as a method of communication. But ideally, this is really meant to be just simply common sense. If you're engaged in a process of saying something and somebody who is hearing impaired is relying upon looking at your lips to understand what you're saying, and that is the method by which the both of you communicate, there's an exception. But ultimately, we're just asking people, as best as is possible, while you're on the outside, wear a mask. It's quite simple. Just to let you know, I had a long conversation with my colleague in Barbados, because in the Caribbean, the attorneys general and ministers, we have a very close relationship. One of the advantage of doing your degree at the University of the West Indies in my time is that you went to school with the entire Caribbean. So I'll tell you, in Jamaica, in Barbados, in Turks and Caicos, wherever it may be, colleagues exist. And some of our jurisdictions, Barbados in particular, have reported that mask wearing is producing great benefit for them, and that Trinidad and Tobago could therefore be assured that we are making sensible measures really for protection. So whilst you can have exceptions applied for you, please remember that you ought to do this. I just received a message from someone who is an avid runner, a serious road runner, runs miles a day, asking me about whether road runners would have to wear masks. And I replied, yes, you will have to wear the masks. And they expressed the dissatisfaction, but understanding as to how difficult it is to run with a mask on. I can tell you, in my own election campaign, having run up to 10 kilometers a day with a mask on, I feel you, I hear you, but we have to comply with the regulations for now. The faster we get through with this, the faster we can get back to life.
Okay. Thank you, 98.1. Thank you, Mr. Cummins. So the issue of, you use the word mutation, I will use the word changes. The virus has, in fact, seemed to have changed. The University of the West Indies, when I met with them 2 Thursdays ago, they are now looking to undertake a study to see how the virus has changed, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but for the Caribbean. As I said in the article in the Express, COVID deaths rise in CARICOM nations. This is a CARICOM thing, not a Trinidad thing, a Tobago thing, a Barbados thing, a Jamaica thing. So with Professor Christine Carrington, who has been here several times, they are undertaking a study to see what is the exact feature of the virus circulating in the CARICOM region now. They have the machinery, they were supposed to acquire all the consumables, and then they will do it, and as soon as they have it, they will let us know. So we await the University of the West Indies to tell us where we are with how the virus has in fact changed over time in the CARICOM region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Dayal Singh. And now we will accept questions, brief questions from TTT.
Hello, good morning, Sonolala, TTT News. Minister Dayal Singh, we are getting word that Barbados now requires disembarking TNT nationals to have a negative PCR test completed at least 72 hours before departing TTT. Now, we understand that some students that were scheduled to to leave yesterday en route to Barbados were not able to do so because they could not get those tests done in time. Question is, can these students returning receive any accelerated tests from government or any government institution? And secondly, to Mr. Al-Rawi, we're getting reports from several persons, I've spoken to several persons, that police, persons interacting with police who via some road traffic exercises and so on, some of these police officers are not wearing their mask. They are concerned what is their rights as it pertains to that, and does this new mask enforcement, not enforcement, this law, does it also apply to police? Because these persons are concerned that when they interact with these police during these road traffic exercises, that they could become infected.
Okay, so thank you, Sunil, for that very important question. When we first answered this question on Saturday at the Prime Minister's press conference, we drew the example of England, which changed its regulations when their own citizens were on a flight coming back to England, having vacation in Spain, where England said once you landed back in England after a certain hour, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., you had to go into 2 weeks quarantine. Each country has to evaluate its risk profile, and we have absolutely no problem with Barbados implementing that measure. We will try as far as humanly possible to help those students who want to leave, and between our testing centers, we will try to prioritize them so that they can leave. So thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Minister. And now we move to...
Sorry, he had a second question.
We move to Attorney General to respond to the second question.
Yes, apologies there. There's so many questions lighting up that we had the need to jump around. Sunil has asked a critically important question. Let me make it abundantly clear. Every single person, from Her Excellency the President right down to all of us, have to wear masks in public. That includes all of our protective services. There are no exceptions. In fact, we purposefully drafted the law that way. Sunil has raised something which I think I really need to address as a collateral issue. I'd like to remind that the fixed penalty notices are being sent to the government printed. They're being printed as we speak right now by the thousands. And in the day that it will take to distribute these things, we have asked that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service engage in an exercise very similar to that which we did in the launch of the demerit point system. You'll recall in the demerit point system, we used a day or two. It was actually a little bit longer, but in this case, we'll go for a day or two to acclimatize the population to being stopped, to say you are in the circumstance of breaking the law and oblige you to come forward and comply. You see, it'll take approximately, in terms of logistical arrangements, a day, maximum two, for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to have the ticketable notices in their hands. And in the meanwhile, the law still prevails. A policeman can stop you on the road in your vehicle once you're in a public place and inform you that you're breaking the law and apply the law. This is something which we have to bear in mind, that we need to comply with the law, and to persons who are concerned about the TTPS or any other form of law enforcement, they are obliged to wear masks as well. That is law enforcement persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attorney General. And now we will accept questions from I-95.5.
Good morning, everyone. Whitfield Turner, I-95.5. AG, let me channel my two questions to you. Now, last week, we heard of an incident on board one of the water taxis where someone would have come forward with a face mask, with a face shield, sorry, as opposed to a face mask. And there were some challenges in that regard. We also know about the differences in the levels of protection between the two. does the law speak specifically to the wearing of masks as opposed to face shield, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of vessels? And secondly, with regards to the socially displaced persons in society, how does this new law propose to treat with them as it pertains to the wearing of masks and so forth?
Okay, let me take the second part first, AG, because that was asked at the Prime Minister's press conference on Saturday. I was told by the responsible minister that face masks have been provided for the socially displaced. So thank you for that, AG.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Thank you for the question. So the first thing is that the law applies to all, including the socially displaced. This virus is no respecter of age or circumstance. The Honourable Minister has confirmed that face masks are being distributed to persons with difficulties in their situation, to the socially displaced, and therefore we will not only apply the law, but we will ensure that they can comply. With respect to face shields, the literature demonstrates, and certainly I had a conversation with the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Parasram, who indicated that it's ultimately preferred that we wear face masks for all of the right reasons in terms of particulate management, you know, how the saliva works and your risk of exposure. Face shields are less ideal, but it is accepted that face shields are being used in other jurisdictions. And because we have to be sensitive to the fact that some people have difficulties in the wearing of masks, there may be physical, mental, or medical issues involved in mask wearing, the alternative of face shields has been something which is accepted elsewhere, and therefore we've permitted it in law. The rule of thumb is that the preference is really for a mask, and therefore if you can, please put on your mask.
Thank you very much. And now we go to CL Communications.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
I have two quick questions. Do people have to walk around with medical certificates to prove that they are unable to wear masks? In other words, how would the police know that someone is genuinely asthmatic or have some other ailment preventing them from wearing a mask? The second question would be, what is the definition of a public space? For example, if I step out of my house to throw garbage, because the reason why I asked that question is because in the earlier days, we had some little confusion with public gatherings and also with the whole who's supposed to shut down. So I just want to get those two things abundantly clear. Thank you.
So a public space is everything that is not private. Quite simply, once it's in the public space, you don't own it, your neighbor doesn't own it, it is therefore a public space. And quite simply, if you're going to take your garbage outside, put on your mask if you're going into a public space. You see, it is really something that is commonsensical. You know what I find quite interesting? We look at the news, we look at many things that come at us by WhatsApp, etc. We see the enforcement in a number of countries. You look whether it is in South America, where people are, believe it or not, in Ecuador, people are exposed, as well as in Peru, to fines of up to $200 on a first offense, $400 after that. So countries take this very seriously, and people see that other places take it seriously. So public space is everything that is not private, and we have to do our very best to put on the masks. I think that should quite simply address the issue.
I had a second question with the do people have to walk around with medical certificates?
Oh, I apologize. That's by far the more important question. Yes, you would do well to have something on you if you have it immediately to demonstrate your condition. So that way you don't run the risk of having a varying degree of difference with the police officer. Now, you've hit something. We have in the fixed penalty notices the ability to appeal. And the notice is a very simple form notice. You'll see it in the Gazette. You have the option to take the fixed penalty notice, not pay it, have yourself before the court and tell the magistrate why it is this law should not have been applied to you because of the legitimate reasons set out in the reasonable excuses, etc. Secondly, you have the option to pay the fixed penalty notice. And even though you've paid it, there's a form that we've printed, you'll see it, where you can say, listen, I've paid this fixed penalty notice, but I believe that I was correct and I want back my money. And you can go before the court and go through that process with the magistrate. The last situation is, of course, where you just pay for the fixed penalty notice and you move on. I'd like to warn that as we build a database of offenders, because all of this is going to be put onto the electronic system, we are going to move to second offenses and third offenses. And in a template form right now, we're saying potentially your second offense might be $2,000, your third offense might be $5,000, and after that you could be looking at simple imprisonment and higher fines. So we are going to be building that database on a day-by-day basis, and everyone who is driving through Trinidad and Tobago or walking through Trinidad and Tobago, be your brother or your sister's keeper. Shout out to your friend in a polite way, listen, put your mask on, not on your chin. It must be on your nose and your mouth.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And now questions from 91.9, please.
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Vern Extavo here from 91.
Morning, Vern.
Hi, Attorney General, if just for clarity's sake, you could give us a little more explanation with respect to parents and their responsibility for their children wearing masks, and what will happen in terms of they being held accountable or culpable for children not wearing masks in public. And in terms of the oximeters, if either the Minister or Dr. St. Bernard could clarify who will be getting those oximeters. Again, I think you did mention it, but if you could give us a little more information, and whether people trying to bring in their own personal oximeters and using them for self-diagnosis, is it encouraged, or what's the advice with respect to those? Those are my two thanks.
Sure. The first question. So the Children's Act number 12 of 2012 sets out a formula where we have somebody called a person with responsibility for a child. That could be a parent, a guardian. In the Trinidadian context, anybody who looks after a child on a usual and continual basis. In this law, in Section 6 and in Section 7, Regulation 6 and Regulation 7, we have provided that if a child is in the company of a person with responsibility for the child, that person may be exposed to a fixed penalty offense of $1,000. I want to let you know that a child can be fined. If that child is on his own or her own, and that child is above 8 years of age, that child can be fined. The forms attached to the regulations will demonstrate, and everybody will know by now that we have a children's court. So if your child is on his own or her own and without a mask, your child can be fined via the fixed penalty notice position. You will go to the children's court. There's one in Port of Spain, there's one in San Fernando, there's one in Tobago, and you will find yourself before the court to pay the penalty, or in the court pay system, in the remote ways that we effect payment. If you are in the company of your child, you're a person with responsibility for this child, you're a parent, guardian, etc., you're an uncle carrying the child out, you can be exposed to the fine yourselves. So quite simple. Let's encourage from the home basis that all of us put on our masks, our face coverings or face shields when we go into the public.
Thank you very much for the question on the pulse oximeters. So the Ministry of Health, knowing that we had to implement our escalation policy, took the decision maybe over a month ago to look into the feasibility of pulse oximeters. I drove that process. We implemented the process as of last week at the Ministry of Health. I will now let Dr. St. Bernard talk to you about the technical applications of that decision.
Hi. So with regard to the pulse oximeters, these are for the COVID positive patients who are being managed at home. So it is not a way to diagnose for COVID-19. That is still something that we're doing at the facilities with the nasopharyngeal swab. What we are using these pulse oximeters for is to monitor persons at home who have already been diagnosed to determine if they meet criteria for COVID hospital admission or if they are safe to continue being managed at home. I hope that answers your question.
Good.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard. And now questions from AZP News.
Hi, good afternoon to the panel. I have two questions. Minister Dayal Singh, can you just give us an update with the change of criteria for quarantine? How has that been going since it came into effect? And my second question is this regarding the reopening of schools tomorrow. Now, the minister, of course, would have announced the school term starting that's tomorrow. And on the same day, the permanent secretary would have issued a circular asking teachers to report for duty. However, we're seeing now that tutor is advising teachers not to report for duty, of course, in a physical sense. Can you give an update on that? Can we get some clarity with regards to the teachers returning? I know the minister would have suggested teleconferencing and Zoom meetings and things like that, but she also indicated that there would be no reason for them not to show up for work once basic protocols, the public health protocols, are followed.
So thank you, Pamela, for your two questions. I'll tackle the second one first. I think the questions that deal with schools is a very important one. I thank you for raising it, but I think the answers are best given by the substantive minister, the Honorable I.A.N. Dolly. I would not like to muddy the waters with a unintelligent or uninformed opinion. On the issue of how the change of criteria is going, in the step-down transition facilities, since we implemented the new policies on Wednesday, normally those facilities would have been filled to about 70 to 80% capacity with hundreds of persons. With the new measures, we are down now to just 6 persons in those facilities. That has the advantage of easing the strain on our healthcare workers, 2, decreasing exposure to healthcare workers, 3, managing consumables well, and 4, a better patient outcome because they are now able to quarantine or isolate, as Dr. St. Bernard has said, in the comfort of their own homes. But we continue to say anyone who wants to voluntarily come into our isolation facilities or quarantine facilities, we offer you the option because we understand and know as a member of parliament that sometimes you have multiple families in one unit, one large family in one unit, so it's difficult to social distance. You may have to share bathroom facilities. So we are cognizant of that, and we have offered them the option. Come into state quarantine. You will be made as comfortably as humanly possible to serve out your 14 days or whatever the requisite period is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And now brief questions from TV6.
Hello. To the Minister of Health, could you give us a scenario too as to how and when these antigen tests would be used as opposed to the PCR test? Because you mentioned that it is a screen, you define it as a screen, whereas we know the PCR test is much more definitive.
Yeah.
And
so,
also,
oh, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
The second question would be, now that persons are being asked to quarantine at home, does the ministry anticipate any underreporting of new cases such that persons may not bother to seek out testing if they have mild to moderate symptoms?
So thank you very much. So I will let the technical expert, Dr. St. Bernard, answer your questions, but what I did call out for you at the start is the antigen test could identify the virus in your nose or throat, and is the same type of technology that is used in doctors' offices for rapid screening. It is an excellent screening tool. It will help us identify patients on a faster basis because the results of these will come within 15 minutes to 30 minutes to 1 hour at the most. So I'll let Dr. St. Bernard go into the actual technical details.
Hi, sorry, could you please repeat your question?
Yes, what I was asking is exactly how the antigen tests would be used as opposed to the PCR test. So is it that the antigen test would replace the need for a PCR test, or would you still have to use them in tandem follow-up? Because he said that the antigen test was a screen.
Yeah, so before she goes there, that is correct. It's a screen, and I did say, based on the results, you may have to follow up with a PCR. So I'll let Dr. St. Bernard go into the technical details.
Yeah, so just to continue on from where Minister started, a screening test is one that determines if you need to go on to have further testing. So therefore, it is not considered diagnostic. So if you do a screening test, this antigen test, and it is positive, this does not then say that you are COVID positive. It says we still need to go on to do the PCR test for you. So you're not going to be able to then move on with the result of the screening test. You would still need to go on to do the actual test that we're accustomed to doing, which is the PCR. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. St. Bernard. And our final questions this evening from Newsday.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. To Minister Alleyne, in terms of the antigen testing, how does this ramp up Trinidad and Tobago's ability we've heard repeated calls for more tests to be done. So how does that do that? How does that achieve that? And to Dr. St. Bernard, in terms of the pulse oximeters, is that the system's response to the people who have not been truthful? And what else is going to be done to get that level of truthfulness out of those people?
And so we move to Dr. St. Bernard to address both questions, please.
Hi, okay, so starting with the second question, the pulse oximeter readings will not help us with truthfulness because people know then the cutoff, which is 94% for the oxygen level and 110 beats per minute for the heart rate level. So if persons know that, they can still not be truthful and state, that their heart rate is 92, and their oxygen saturation is 100. So we are hoping to actually just be able to better monitor persons at home, because the thing with COVID is that you can feel quite well, but you are what they call happy hypoxemic, where your oxygen level is low, even though you feel quite well. So what this does, it is adding another level of us being able to detect early if it is you require hospital admission. So it's not going to help us with the truthfulness. We are hoping, as usual, with the relationship that you have with the person who's calling you on a daily basis, because for most of the COVID positive patients, they're going to be called every day, twice a day, for 20 days. So we're just hoping that with the plea and the request that we want you to be well and we don't want anything bad to happen to you, that you would be willing to just tell us, how you're doing. What was the first question again? Sorry.
In terms of the capacity for the antigen testing, how does that help Trinidad and Tobago really ramp up its testing capability and capacity?
Well, we'll be able to quickly determine persons that then need to go on to have the PCR test done. So a lot more persons can do it. We can have it in quick turnaround time, and we're hoping that that will help us to determine a lot quicker, a lot more persons who then need to have the test done. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard. And we have some brief statements from the Attorney General at this point.
Thank you very much. I've just received a little message from the Minister of National Security, who has been kindly double-checking, as we always do, with what the government printry produces as opposed to what was signed. And ladies and gentlemen, because we're working in a virtual environment, sometimes by the time you get it to the printer, there may be different versions working. I want to make it clear that we're going to have some errors corrected between what was approved by the cabinet and what was printed by the printer. In particular, that is with respect to two matters. One, the age limit of children. It is at 8 years. It is not 5 nor 11. It is 8. And then secondly, there is a position of someone asking whether the removal of a mask for a temporary purpose is for security or identification purposes. I note that the printer had put in here words that it is necessary for the purpose of receiving services or while engaging in athletic or fitness activity. Fitness activity is not excluded. If you are on the road, if you are engaged in fitness activity, you have to wear the mask. These things were not part of the approved regulations, and I think that the government printer, in the corrigendum, in the error being picked up, as we've proofread it now this morning, we're going to correct these things. So please be aware, look out for the published regulations in the corrected version that will be disseminated as soon as this conference is over.
Thank you very much for everyone who joined us today, and may God continue to bless Trinidad and Tobago. Happy Independence Day.